Hello, buddy. Welcome back to Tin Man's Core Channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and today I'm reacting to my third and final Shiny Gold Tails video for you guys. And this was titled 4 True Terrifying McDonald's Horror Stories. So without further ado, I'm going to turn these lights off, move the camera up here for you guys, and let's get this reaction on the road in the bag, shall we? Okay, here we go.
I'm Luke, and I was working the drive-thru at McDonald's when this happened.
Okay.
It was still my first month on the job, so I was pretty new, and I had a lot to learn about how everything worked. I had been there for about 3 hours when a customer pulled up to the drive-thru. He gave me his order right away, but then tried asking me a lot of personal questions, like which school I went to, and if I had a girlfriend.
Okay. If somebody shows up to the drive-thru and they place an order, but then they start asking personal questions like what school do you go to, how old you are you single or not, that's too personal. I'll be like, I'm sorry, I don't think I'm going to tell you all that information. But I'll be getting the manager too to let them know what was going down. But let's just see what happens next, shall we?
I tried to be polite, but didn't answer any of them for obvious reasons. At first, I thought it was just one of my friends messing with me and disguising his voice. But when the car pulled up to the window, it was just some guy in his 40s or 50s. He had slicked back gray hair and large bags under his eyes. His yellow teeth were hanging out of his mouth as he smiled at me.
Ugh.
He took his food and drove away, but it doesn't end there. Later that night, I got a text message from an unknown number. It just said, "Thanks for the service today." I typed back saying that he had the wrong number. Then I got a reply that said, "Isn't this Luke from the drive-thru?" After that, I blocked the number and put my phone away for the night. I never told my parents or anybody else about what happened. I was pretty sure that it was that creepy guy from earlier, but I will never know for sure. It's pretty scary to think of how he could have gotten my number and why. It seemed like he was just taunting me, like he wanted me to know that he knew who I was. Thankfully, I never saw him again.
I don't know why that guy had to do that, because you're literally scaring the boy to death. But man, I would have been telling my folks, I would have been telling the manager at the McDonald's to see if they could look up the cameras of that dude entering the drive-thru and see if they could get what make and model car he's got, just so they can contact the police and get him arrested. Because I would like to know how in the world did he get his phone number just so he could text him. But I'm just glad that dude never came back to his McDonald's that he works at and did not find out where he lived at, because then I know his parents will be asking for an explanation of why that guy is showing up here. But anyway, let's get to story number 2, shall we?
I'm a 23-year-old guy, and I was working at McDonald's. I worked the last shift of the night, so it was my responsibility to close the place. I liked this shift mainly because it was not very busy like it is during the day. It was around 10 minutes to close, and I had everything pretty much wrapped up. I had the register emptied and ready to drop off the cash at the bank on my way home. I had my shirt untucked and my jacket on, and I was about ready to turn off the lights when I noticed something. There was a man sitting in the farthest corner of the dining area. I was almost sure that I'd checked the whole place before, but maybe I was wrong. There was one of those sensors on the door that makes a sound when somebody enters, so I would have noticed if he had just come in. Either way, I walked over to the guy from behind. He was facing away from me. I couldn't tell much about his appearance, but he was wearing a large winter coat, which was strange because it was not that cold out.
Yeah, I know that would be strange. This is somebody that is literally sneaking in with a large coat just so they can hide something, maybe a weapon. I don't know. He may be planning to rob the place, but I don't want to keep shoving theories out the door here, so let's just continue with this person's story and see what happens.
I just had a light jacket. He was hunched over on the table, his arms crossed, with his head resting on them. When I stopped, I was about 10 feet away from him, and I said, "Excuse me, sir. We're closing now." He didn't move a muscle, but I could see that his breathing had become heavier. I took 2 large steps back just to be safe. Then I said, "You okay, sir? We open tomorrow at 7 a.m. Again, he didn't respond, but his breathing grew even louder, almost like a soft growl. I then decided that this situation was beyond my pay grade, so I headed to the back to think of what to do. After a few minutes, I realized that my only option was to call the police. I hate to get law enforcement involved, especially since he didn't really do anything, but the man's behavior was strange enough that I was getting seriously creeped out. When the police arrived, they tried to get the man to leave, but not surprisingly, he wouldn't move a muscle for them either. Eventually, they had to remove him physically, and when they did, the officers searched him for weapons. What they found was seriously terrifying. Hidden in the man's winter coat was a small arsenal of different types of weapons, including knives, a gun, and scariest of all, a pair of handcuffs. This guy was definitely up to something. The police arrested him for trespassing immediately, and I assume further charges may come up related to the weapons, depending on whether he had them legally and with the correct permit. It's still not clear what he was doing there or why he wouldn't leave. The two of us were alone in there for a while, so if he wanted to hurt me, then he had every opportunity. I feel lucky because this incident could have ended much worse for me. However, it was one of the scariest things that ever happened to me while I was working there.
Man, that does sound scary. And I agree with him calling the cops on this dude because if he ain't moving to his commands, then the cops would have been able to get him moved. But then if they physically moved him to get him out, I figured that he was going to start fist fighting them, but no, he didn't. It's like he didn't have a care in the world. But when they said they found assortment of weapons, I said, I knew it. That's why he was wearing a thick coat, just so he can conceal them better. He probably wanted to handcuff that employee somewhere just so he can rob the cash registers and walk out of there. But thank God he got trespassed, and so that means he won't be going back there. And if he gets any other charges for the weapons and for not listening to the commands of the police officers, then he might not get released. But hey, that guy brought it all on himself because he wouldn't leave.
I used to work at an electronics store in a large plaza. There was a big parking lot and at least 10 or 15 stores.
Wow.
I usually worked 8-hour shifts, from noon until 8 p.m., so definitely long enough that I would want some food at some point. There were a few options in the area. One of them was McDonald's, and I would go there occasionally. It was on the other side of the parking lot from where my store was, right next to the bank, and there was a Starbucks on the other side. Not a bad combination.
Man, that would be nice to work in a store that's right next to other stores and has a big parking lot. Golly, 15 stores? Whew. I remember the malls we went to had like half the size of what he just mentioned. And there were some malls that we went to had like over 20 stores in it. But hey, if I see a McDonald's near me, that'll be my go-to stop to get food in a jiffy. But let's continue.
Sometimes I would grab a coffee afterwards. It was about 5 o'clock, and I was getting pretty hungry, so I told my manager that I was going to go on break. Then I walked past the row of stores, eventually finding my way to the McDonald's. I pushed open the big glass door and got in line. There were about 3 or 4 people in front of me, and another one came in afterwards and stood behind me. I had been waiting for a few minutes when suddenly the door to the place crashed open. I had never seen anybody barge into a fast food place like that with so much force. The heavy door slammed into the wall hard enough that I'm surprised the glass didn't break. Everyone in the line turned around and watched as an absolute giant of a man stomped in. He didn't need to say a word for everyone in there to know that he was angry. The guy was at least 6'4" and must have been over 300 pounds. He was definitely overweight, but strong too. He had a bald head, a long beard, and just generally looked like a tough guy. He wore a black t-shirt with the sleeves ripped off, and a pair of dirty blue jeans. leading down to a pair of worn-out brown work boots. I was confused at first. Everyone was fixated on this guy, but nobody seemed to know what his problem was. I turned around and tried to ignore him, and as soon as I did, he started screaming about how somebody dented his car. I knew for a fact that it wasn't me, since I didn't even drive at the time. For whatever reason, he seemed to single out the guy behind me in line and started berating the guy and really getting in his face. The man behind me was much smaller, but he wasn't a pushover and really stood up to the larger man who seemed to be bullying him at the time. After a minute or so of yelling, words escalated to action. I never saw who threw the first punch, but my guess is that it was the big man. The smaller guy seemed tough, but he was no match for the size of his foe. The fight was over before it started. The rest of the people in the restaurant just stood there staring. A mixture of shock and horror was expressed on our faces.
All over a dent in the car. You do not have to get so steaming mad and walk into the store and slam the door saying, "Who dented my car?" and then start arguing with the guy right behind this man. I mean, I'm surprised that they did not call the police and have that de-escalated. The way he was describing that dude, 6'4" and wearing old worn out clothes, that just sounds like somebody you do not want to be around.
It's really disturbing that we all just stood there and let it happen, but eventually, one of the workers yelled out that he was calling the police. When that happened, the big guy stopped and peered up. The look on his face was like a dog who had just peed on the carpet. Then he simply turned around and left, his victim still lying on the ground. I stood there in disbelief at what had just happened. It was less than 5 minutes before the police showed up, and an ambulance was there soon after. I was questioned by the officers and gave them a description of the big guy. It turned out that he was just outside, smoking a cigarette, presumably waiting to be arrested. It's really unfortunate that we let something like this happen. The guy was huge, but there were at least 5 or 6 other people in the place. We could have easily restrained him and saved that other guy from a beating, but we didn't. We just stood there like a bunch of deer in the headlights. And sure, it was not our job to do anything about it, but it's a shame that people don't look out for each other anymore.
I know. But if people get involved, then they're going to have to stay and talk with the police just to give a statement. And you never know, that big guy might end up tackling them ground on ground. But I am surprised that that dude did not even leave the scene instead of just standing out there smoking like he was waiting for the police to arrest him. So that guy is really a mental nutcase. I just hope that guy that he tackled down to the ground did not get hurt as bad to where he needed surgery. That is just ridiculous and unnecessary.
My name is Darren, and I had been working the late shift at McDonald's when this happened. I was 19 at the time, and I'd recently graduated from high school. I took the late shift because it was the easiest way to fit in with my school schedule, but now that I'd graduated, I kept doing it anyway. This location was in a large strip mall with a big parking lot in the middle and many large stores surrounding it. There was a Walmart and an Applebee's right next door. The whole area was really well lit, and I never felt unsafe, even when I was there late by myself. However, one scary thing did happen, and that's what this story is all about. I had just finished serving the last customer for the evening. It was about 5 minutes to close, and my coworker Sarah headed over to the entrance and locked the door. Then we spent the next half hour or so cleaning and tidying up the place like usual. I emptied the cash register. There was probably less than $200 there, because most people don't use cash anymore these days, but I would drop it off at the night deposit box at the bank anyway. Sarah and I walked to the front entrance, and she unlocked it. She was the key holder, so when we stepped out into the night, she turned around and locked the door behind us while I stood there and waited. Once the door was locked, we started walking to our cars. We had parked next to each other so that neither of us would have to walk alone. We had made it about 50 feet from the restaurant when it happened. Three men ran out from behind a van and charged at us. They were all dressed in black and wearing masks. We had to make a split-second decision. Do we go for our cars or back to the restaurant? I looked at Sarah, my whole body shaking. As soon as we locked eyes, she bolted back to the building, and I ran after her. She had the door unlocked by the time I got there, but the three men were not far behind. We slipped into the building, but one of the guys got his foot in the door. The two of us frantically tried to pull the door closed while this strange man tried to work his way in. I started stomping on his foot, hoping that he would pull it back from the pain. It worked, and he removed his foot. Then the large glass door slammed closed. I would have thought that the men would run away at this point, but they didn't. They stood out there looking at us. I felt like one of those scuba divers who goes diving with sharks in a metal cage. We were perfectly safe in this little box, but there was a swarm of predators waiting for us outside, ready to get us as soon as we stepped out. I locked eyes with one of the three guys, and even though his face was covered, I recognized him. It was one of my other coworkers, Pat. We rarely worked the same shift, and we were far from friends, but I was pretty sure it was him. By this time, Sarah had called 911, and the police were on their way. Our tormentors took off soon after. We told the police what had happened, and although I didn't have any proof, I told them that I was pretty sure I knew one of the guys. They took my tip, and that combined with the surveillance footage was enough to arrest Pat. Charges are still pending against him and his accomplices, and although we didn't see any weapons, it's not looking good for him. I still wonder what they would have done if they caught us. All I can think of is that they wanted the money from the register, but like I said earlier, it was less than $200, and Pat would have known that since he worked there too. It just doesn't make any sense to take all that risk for an amount that small. Maybe he was desperate, but still, it's hard to believe that there's not a better option. Either way, I'm glad he was caught, and I hope I never see that guy again.
Yeah, that don't make no sense to me either. Why would a coworker take all that risk and steal only $200 from the cash registers unless he was really desperate and won't get paid that much? But there are other ways of getting more money. Work overtime or work odd jobs just to make a little extra cash. You don't go and try to steal it from your coworkers while they're about to take it to the drop box at the bank. But I'm glad they gave that tip on who they think it was to the authorities, and they were able to use the camera footage and arrest him. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications for more Shining Gold Tales reactions like this. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man Score channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor. I said that's a wrap, and have a nice day, y'all.